From baggage claim to pajamas in 10 minutes. Erie International Airport. Fly with ERI.com.
Fly Erie International Airport to Charlotte on American Airlines, your nonstop gateway to the world. Also, we have Breeze Airways flying nonstop to Orlando and Tampa, Florida. A great low-cost carrier providing excellent service to the regional community. Fly Erie International for your travel needs.
Fly with ERI.com.
All year round, Frontier Home Products and Design has what you need to make your home comfortable and beautiful. Relax on a new timber tech deck designed by Frontier's experts. A new fireplace from Frontier Home Products Fireplace Gallery adds warmth and serenity to any home. Beauty and versatility at Frontier Home Products and Design Center, 4213 Peachtree, East 5th, next to the Bayfront Highway.
Frontier Home Products and Design Center. Discover a new frontier.
PA contractor number PA039007.
Welcome to TalkErie.com's Joel Natalie Show, Erie, Pennsylvania's daily podcast. Every day, we tackle the biggest issues that the Erie, PA region faces. Stay informed and involved as we advance the narrative of Erie. Now, here's Joel Natalie.
Glad that you're with us. We are glad to welcome back to the microphones here the former congressman for our district. I don't even know if it was the 16th district back then. Was it, Phil?
It went through several iterations.
Yeah.
So
But our former
anything.
Congressman Phil English, what was your role? You had a county role or a city role before all that?
Years before that, I was city controller for one term.
Okay. Yeah. And here you are. Again, when you were on last, you really have a very, very distinct and I think insightful take on where Erie's at, on where we are politically as a country. And so I want to lean in on that because this is a wild and woolly year. I mean, things that you would never, ever see happen in 100 years are happening in 2024 during this presidential race.
Well, and Joel, you're very flattering, but frankly, I didn't anticipate a lot of this. I learn by listening, and I envy you your job because you get to listen to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I felt earlier this year that Biden was probably going to be set aside at some point, and that was because I was hearing reports through people that I knew in the media, that people on the inside of the White House felt that Joe Biden was losing his edge. And that's nothing to be happy about or politicize. But I was not surprised when it happened, and I wasn't surprised when Harris was chosen because they really didn't have an alternative. And so
they couldn't jump over all these scenarios, these Aaron Sorkin, scenarios. Bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work that way in the real world. Kamala Harris had paid her dues, had run for president once herself, well to the left of Joe Biden, and had been on the ticket as a balancer. And she was there because some folks on the progressive side of the equation had insisted that Joe have somebody like that to balance the coalition.
Right.
Harris, I think, has had a masterful campaign, but my criticism, if you want me to offer one, is that she hasn't had a very eventful vice presidency or senatorship. So as a result, you see a lot of her ads are focused on what she did as DA and as state attorney general in California.
And they keep quoting her from her primary campaign in 2019 when she kind of dropped out of the race before one vote was cast, before Iowa in 2019.
She had a clear position in the field in 2019, which was hard left. She was hard left on trade, which will appeal to some people. But she was hard left on social issues. She was hard left on immigration. She was hard left on a general economic agenda. That's not what she is today. But let's acknowledge the fact that some people have come into the political arena and ended up in office doing things very different the positions that they initially took. FDR is a good example of that. And let me be very clear before people pile on me. I'm not suggesting that she is FDR.
Right. But Joe Biden wanted to be. But yeah, I'm just
my take on it is that this is very interesting because Republicans are having to retool their campaign to deal with a very different opponent. And to be candid, I think there's legitimate criticism of Donald Trump that he hasn't really modified his approach to things since 2016. My friend Mike Murphy, who is a critic of Trump, has called him a one-trick pony. And I think that there is some legitimacy to that on tactics. Now, I'll also say, well, I think Kamala Harris won the one debate that she has allowed with Trump. And let's not forget she declined to do one on Fox News. So I don't think she gets to complain if they only have one debate. She won that on points. But I think clearly Vance won last night on points. Yeah. Does that matter? Probably not that much. But I think that Vance masterfully made the case against Harris in a way that Trump had not. But my former colleague, Governor Walz, didn't. I don't think embarrassed himself. I think he also did a credible job. But it was a clear win for Vance. Is that going to move the needle? It may with some swing voters who I don't think were really convinced by Harris's performance on the issues in her debate. And I relate to that because I consider myself an issue-oriented voter.
Sure.
And as you're probably getting out of this, I'm not here to offer a partisan critique for why to vote for Donald Trump. Although, for a variety of reasons, I think the Republican agenda, the real Republican agenda, not the references to Project 2025, which is frankly ridiculous. The real Republican agenda, I think, is right about where the public needs to be, with one or two exceptions. And I think it's going to be a fascinating race to the end. And the question we should be asking ourselves, which of these would be successful in office in dealing with the big problems, which include fiscal imbalances that nobody is talking about, a coming tax cliff. Everybody's taxes are going up according to the current code, whether that's acknowledged or not, and Social Security and Medicare are both at risk. All of these things are going to have to be dealt with in the next Congress. Who can put it together to fix these problems?
Well, I'm going to submit, Phil, that none of the above, at least in the executive branch, are willing to get anywhere serious with what you just mentioned. I mean, I haven't heard anything said about debt and the deficit. I just hear, hey, we're going to give you free taxes on tips, and then somebody says, oh, we'll give you free taxes on tips too, or we're not going to tax overtime. I'm like, how the heck would you ever get away with this kind of fiscal policy?
I spent 14 years working on the tax code, and I was in Congress and voted for some changes that attracted bipartisan support that actually got us to a balanced budget in 2000. So I don't see anyone talking seriously about this at this time. Recognize that this is not a popular thing to talk about. So I think both parties are kind of whistling past the graveyard.
Yeah.
What I don't agree with is the argument that Donald Trump created the problem. That's ridiculous. If you look at the actual performance of the economy under Donald Trump's tax changes, the tax base has increased. So we are doing better than we were projected to do with Donald Trump's tax policies, providing some forward momentum in the economy. I also don't, there's a lot of blame being thrown around on a whole range of issues, and I think we should deal with all of that with a pinch of salt.
There's no doubt about it. I want to get to the how this transition, in your opinion, as a scholar of the government, right? Again, you've been embedded for government pretty much your entire career. I mean, other than going back to 68 and smoke-filled rooms, I mean, how does this happen that someone who got 14 million votes is not at the top of the ticket, and someone that has gotten no primary votes is at the top of the ticket at the Democrat side?
There's no easy answer for that, because I think a lot of people knew that Joe Biden would have difficulty serving out a second term. And yet no one went to him at the appropriate time the way Goldwater went to Nixon and say, hey, pal, time to move on. That's, whether it's fair or not, this was allowed to reach a crisis point, and then Nancy Pelosi came in and met with the president, and what we know is she pushed and he got out of the race. And there is some bitterness over that.
Yeah.
My sense is that Joe Biden this year has been in the bunker, and that's something no president in dangerous times should be doing. So, and by the way, that's not a wholehearted endorsement for the other side as well. I think that I was studying political science back in the 1970s when we were looking at something called the McGovern-Fraser Commission, which reorganized the way presidential candidates are selected, utilizing the primary system more aggressively, empowering voters, and now a lot of that is out the window.
It really is, isn't it? Wow.
We need to go back, I think, to the beginning and rethink, with modern politics, modern social media, how you do nominations. I think we should also I think parties need to be cohesive enough to put together a unified agenda. And I think that the whole nomination process needs to be rethought. I think we should go back to utilizing the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primaries more aggressively, because that's an opportunity for an authentic grassroots candidate, frankly, like a Jimmy Carter, to come in and by personal interaction rather than gross spending, be able to get the nomination. Donald Trump brought a new approach by energizing social media, a social media platform he had built before he came into politics, to essentially message, build support, and overwhelm the establishment. Trump's achievement here is something comparable to Goldwater's takeover of the Republican Party in '64, McGovern's takeover of the Democratic Party in '72, and we tend to forget one of the great revolutions was in 1896, when McKinley organized the Republican nomination using business leaders and business methods out from under the party machines in various states. I think we need a new model here. Both parties do. And people need to be able to take ownership in the party and feel that they're getting a return on it. Otherwise, I think that support for the two major parties is drooping. I think that the Democratic Party has lost an enormous amount of market share, and the Republican Party hasn't gained it. And instead, we have a lot of people who are independents who are effectively disenfranchised, which I would add brings up a wonderful cause that my friend David Thornburg has been advocating around the state, to open up primaries, so that independents can participate in primaries and help choose the candidates. Just a few random thoughts. Thanks for letting me ramble across.
No, I love it. One more thing, and maybe 60 seconds on this, but it deserves a lot more. what has been shocking to me, especially this go round, it was there in 2020, but it really is shocking in 2024, is this whole cohort of lifelong Republicans who are anti-Trump. There was a rally in Lancaster, Republicans against Trump, or something like that. But anybody who is put that way, the current rank and file of the Republican Party calls them a rhino.
Yeah. And there are some ironies here because some of the people who have been drawn into the Trump movement don't necessarily track all of the profile of what the Republican Party has traditionally represented in terms of an approach to governance.
Right.
The Republican Party is far more diverse than it has been credited with being by the media or by its enemies. But it needs to retain its diversity after this election is over. Speaking as someone who is a registered Republican, I think the Republican Party has to get together and I think rebuild ties between the factions. Similar rebuilding has to be done on the Democratic side. The Democrats have been united by Donald Trump, and after this election, he is going to be irrelevant. So the split between the traditional governance wing of the Democratic Party and the Sanders movement and some other elements, I think is going to be in sharp display. And if Kamala Harris wins, it'll be interesting to see. Policy is personnel, and who she appoints to cabinets and also sub-cabinet positions will be very telling. My instinct is that she will veer left on a lot of appointments, but I don't know that. And I think it will be very interesting to see if she develops as president an inclusive model if elected, or if she tries to drive her party and solidify it further to the left. I think that in the current circumstances, the left-wing model doesn't work very well in this country. What Harris, or for that matter Trump, will have to do is attract support across party lines and also from the political center if they're going to overcome a lot of problems.
I want to ask you, Phil, about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, okay, we elected Dick Thornburg. We've had a steady stream of Republicans in what is now the 16th district in our congressional district, and we have that Alabama thing. Philly, Pittsburgh, and Alabama in the T. But for years and years, when it came to presidential politics, we were blue. We were pretty reliably blue. Trump blew that up, didn't he?
He did, because he was able to energize a lot of people who were disaffected with the Democratic political establishment, some of whom stayed home. But he was able to hold the Republican base and get some blue-collar Democrats to cross the line. And a lot of that has continued. What people don't notice is that the party registration advantage for Democrats in the state has been shrinking. The Democratic registration now in the state is at historic lows.
Yeah.
Republicans have been growing, and independents have been growing.
Yeah.
And as a result, the way I think about Pennsylvania goes back to a comment by a guy named Neil Pierce back in the early 70s, who wrote a book about the mid-Atlantic states. And when he focused on Pennsylvania, he said the real takeaway is that if you ask someone from Pennsylvania where they're from, they'll say Erie or Scranton or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Altoona, but they're not going to say Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania doesn't have a unified identity. The political culture in Philadelphia, where I went to school, and the Philadelphia suburbs, where I have a lot of friends, is totally different from Western Pennsylvania.
Sure is.
Many of the central Pennsylvania communities are very different from Erie, and I'll tell you, I welcome the attention to Erie County as the supposed swing county in this equation, but the truth is politically, we're a one-off. We're not like any of the counties around us, and we're not really wired into the politics of the rest of the state. We've always been kind of a standalone with ties culturally similar to upstate New York and also the part of Ohio that we rebut on that is kind of unique in itself. So my view is that Pennsylvania is very hard to quantify, and outsiders really don't understand it very well. And unless you've gone to all of these communities and seen how they differ and engaged them on the ground, you're not going to do very well. Candidates like, I'll pick on someone, Mehmet Oz, who parachuted in, had minimal credentials for Pennsylvania, little understanding of it, perfectly nice guy.
Right.
But he really didn't have a connection with Pennsylvania, and he didn't really have a way of navigating what I've just described. John Fetterman, who politically was considered by a lot of people on one end of the scale. I think that, by the way, was kind of unfair. I think he's an independent thinker. But Fetterman had a sense of the grassroots, having grown up in York, having settled in and having had a big impact in a small community in the Mon Valley. He understood these things far better. Pennsylvania is a unique place that combines elements of the eastern megalopolis, the suburban set of communities that run all the way from Boston.
Acela corridor,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To the Lehigh Valley, to Scranton, to Pittsburgh, which is kind of unique, to Erie.
Get paid to drive. Start a new career behind the wheel at the EMTA. If you are looking for a high-paying and rewarding career with full benefits and paid training, stop by or apply online today with the EMTA. Plus, EMTA riders can now enjoy free Wi-Fi on new, clean, and environmentally friendly buses to travel all over Erie County. Visit ridethee.com for more information.
Get on board EMTA. Get on board EMTA. Get
Quickfill gasoline is made right here in America. United Refining Company, who operates Quickfill, refines its gasoline from North American crude oil in Warren, Pennsylvania. When you buy United Refining Company gasoline at Quickfill, you keep jobs and businesses in America. And you keep American families strong. You don't need to send your money overseas when you buy gasoline. Buy American-made gasoline at Quickfill. Quickfill, driving America.
Phil English, the former congressman and current consultant, and do you do some lobbying too, or?
I do some lobbying, but thank goodness that's not all I do. I get to work on policy issues.
Yeah.
I had something nationally called the Healthcare Group Purchasing Industry Initiative, for example. We study the healthcare supply chain, we apply best practices, and we inject transparency into it. We have a group of healthcare GPOs that represent most of the industry have signed on to letting us do this independent project and essentially hold their feet to the fire and inject disclosure. It's a fascinating experience. I've been bouncing around the country interviewing these guys and learning a lot about the healthcare system kind of at the ground level, purchasing, trying to generate savings, trying to attract new innovation into the marketplace as quickly as possible. It's a practical side to the healthcare system that you typically don't find in the legislative branch, and they've hired us essentially to explain those things to the executive and the legislative branch.
Talk about, while we're on the subject here, I'm interested in the nature and the effectiveness of these pharmacy middlemen. There's a term for them.
PBMs.
What is that?
Pharmacy benefit managers essentially manage the flow of drugs between the suppliers, between the drug manufacturers and the end-using organizations. So essentially, they manage how pharmacy products move and essentially are placed. They came into existence. By the way, they use many of the same mechanisms that the healthcare GPOs that we work with use, and they generate savings. But a lot of the discounts that they generate, they internalize. So they are, the good example from Pennsylvania is Amerisource Bergen, which is located outside of Philadelphia. I'm very familiar with them. They generated extraordinary revenues and also moved an enormous amount of pharmaceutical products for years. I saw them when I was in Congress from a distance, but it really wasn't until I got closer in that I realized a lot of the significance of a lot of what they were doing. Some people think that a lot of savings can be generated by regulating PBMs differently, and I think that case is being made right now in Congress.
But there's that whole nature, though, that other than let's say the Merck or the Pfizer, there's a vertical stack of the insurance company, the PBM, and then the end practitioner, which are often maybe even employees of a CVS Caremark or what have you. I mean, they're stacking that vertically.
And so the big issue that comes into play is how do you inject transparency and hence best practices into those structures? We have, and I'll say full disclosure, they utilize our firm to do lobbying, and it's headed by one of the guys that I regularly work with. But there is an organization called Transparency RX, which is an association that essentially does the PBM job, injecting transparency into the process, so that how those discounts are allocated, how those credits are applied, can be done in a way where everyone sees how it plays, and the end consumers can make decisions then how they organize, how they get the drugs. There's no question. When we created, for example, the Medicare Part D benefit, we counted on, and it's been largely successful, the organizations that were providing the benefit, typically insurance companies, but any one of a number of different structures. The organizations providing the benefit were created to leverage discounts out of the manufacturers. So in effect, the design of Medicare Part D has been generating savings since it was created. Wow. And one of my criticisms of the Republicans is that they actually designed the benefit and then didn't take credit for it.
Oh, wow. Are you concerned that the electorate can't follow along with the nitty-gritty like this? Because, I mean, the ACA continues to come up as a political football, in an election like this,
I thought it was very interesting that Senator Vance last night made the point that under the Trump administration, the ACA in some critical ways which had been ailing, was actually reinforced. Now, Donald Trump tried to repeal the ACA.
Right. Got the big thumbs down by John McCain, right?
Got the big thumbs down by John McCain. But then Plan B involved some changes that have allowed the ACA to be sustainable. The thing nobody is talking about is that next year the ACA subsidies are going to be up for renewal, and there's a big expense involved. It's going to impact on the availability and the affordability of health care for everybody, and how to design that and how to pay for it is going to be reopened. I still think there's ground for bipartisanship in this space. When I left Congress, I was working with a bipartisan group of U.S. senators on something that was designed differently from the ACA, but also was universal coverage. Oh. And I think we could have had a somewhat more market-oriented approach that would have generated more savings, more innovation, but would have had many of the same features of the ACA. If you're, Vance also tried to make the point last night that you can be against the ACA in some particulars, but still be in favor of some of the insurance reforms that were common at the time to virtually all of the proposals out there, including pre-existing.
I was going to say, no one wants to get rid of that clause.
No one does, but every time the ACA comes up as an issue, the argument by its supporters is that you must be against getting rid of pre-existing condition. You must be talking about essentially skewing things against people in certain circumstances. You're no longer in favor of having insurance readily available to family members after they had otherwise aged out, that sort of thing.
We're seeing that same thing happen with the Tax Act of 2017, where basically, Donald Trump wants to, with his tariffs, we're going to be a $3,000 tax on families. Meanwhile, he wants to keep tax cuts for billionaires. Well, the tax cut of 2017 affected everyday Joes in Erie, Pennsylvania, including the bipartisan Opportunity Zone. So when you start scratching at it, they say, well, we'll keep the Opportunity Zones and we'll keep the, some of the expanded child care, and they want to fiddle with it, and then it ends up being. But we got to get rid of the cap on the SALT, which is a state and local tax, which. If you live in D.C., you want that to be removed.
Sure.
But in Erie, we feel like we're subsidizing New Jersey.
Basically, what it means is the SALT provision allows like-minded taxpayers in high tax jurisdictions, like in New York City, to pay less federal taxes than someone in a similar circumstance in Erie, Pennsylvania. And is that a problem? I've heard arguments both ways. I tend to be just on the margins skeptical of the SALT, but I also recognize that given the tax burdens of some of the big cities and their tax base problems, it could be deadly to a New York City or a Chicago if you didn't have some sort of SALT deduction. So this is one of the things that we should debate. When I'm on the board of the Tax Foundation, and we've done a lot of original research on the economics of taxation as well as the immediate distributional effects. And I can tell you that the Trump tax bill did not exclusively benefit high-income individuals, that corporate taxes are now, for this country, roughly where the OECD average is, by which I mean we used to have a corporate tax burden that was near the top of the developed world. Everyone else, since the 86 Act, had been cutting taxes and repositioning themselves from a competitive basis, and we had not. Mm-hmm. So we had comparatively high taxes on corporations, and as a result, we had corporations finding ways to move offshore. You can try to punish them for doing that, but as a practical matter, in a world of mergers, you're going to have a porous situation. Here's the problem, Joel. The tax rate was lowered, but the base on corporate transactions was actually broadened. So if you do what Kamala Harris wants and take it up from 21 to 28, our tax system is going to be less competitive, and the tax on people's jobs who work for corporations, including manufacturing, is going to go up, and those jobs are going to erode again. There's no question that's going to happen. We could debate whether Donald Trump's approach of lowering corporate taxes for domestic manufacturing is a good idea and how you would structure it. I have very mixed feelings about how you could actually implement that.
Right.
But there's no question the fact is we already have a very progressive tax system, and we already tax corporations at a rate that's about average for the developed world. And so there are going to be consequences. And the idea that we're going to, as some candidates are claiming, raise taxes on corporations and rich people in order to provide tax cuts to you and me, well, that may not happen because we're running a $2 trillion annual deficit anyway.
It really is extremely alarming that our tax receipts have never been higher and we still can't seem to balance this budget.
That's exactly right. And our tax receipts have never been higher despite the fact that the Trump tax reforms went in.
Yeah.
So they did, with lower rates, but also adjusting and broadening the base, they did stimulate some growth. Mm-hmm. And I would argue with the level of national debt that we have today, the only way we can dig out is if we start growing the economy a little faster than the debt is accumulating. And that means if we're running a 2% deficit, we're running more than that now, but if we're running a 2% deficit, we should be, at best, running a 2.5% growth rate so that the debt shrinks over time. That's what we did after World War II. Mm-hmm. That's what the British Empire did after the Napoleonic Wars. We need to grow our way out of the debt.
Isn't this what Kennedy wanted to do when he was facing marginal tax rates in the 80 percentile?
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And Kennedy cut taxes, Reagan cut taxes.
Yeah.
But it's also worth noting that Reagan also broadened the base.
Right.
And so it created a dynamic that encouraged more growth. Now, I'm going to ask you a trick question. We're hearing that Joe Biden wanted to raise capital gains taxes into the 30s. Kamala Harris wants to raise capital gains taxes to about, I think, 28%. But there's also a surtax of about, I think, 5% on top of that already in the law. So at what rate do the authorities say the capital gains tax will generate the most revenue?
Probably at the lower rate.
The authorities that aren't as much into dynamic scoring, frankly, as economists that have studied it, say that it's about 26%.
Okay.
When I was on Ways and Means, we actually assessed this issue, and we were told by folks who had specialized in this that the real tax rate at which normally the maximum revenue is generated on capital gains may be somewhere between 15 and 20%, or it may be a little higher, or it may actually be a little lower. But that gives you a sense. We are actually hearing people advocating for capital gains taxes that are above the level at which they're going to generate the maximum revenue.
There's a point of no return. This it's a fascinating conversation, but in this moment, I want you to weigh in on the moment of this concept of this being a feels election, that Kamala Harris is the brat candidate. She's a fresh new face, although she's almost 60. She's almost as old as I am. But honestly, they're pushing in on that American Idol approach to choosing our chief executive, and that Donald Trump is this old meanie orange guy, and I just feel like there's going to be a huge cohort of voters that are going to make their decision based on how this person makes them feel.
But Joel, that's been going on since the beginning of the Republic. I mean, let's face it.
His Excellency, George Washington, right?
Well, George Washington was unique. He was the one guy who could step into the presidency at that time.
Jefferson replaces Adams. Jefferson was more popular.
I'm thinking more of the second American political system. Andrew Jackson, it was horrifying to official Washington that this general who had actually shot 8 people reputedly on the frontier at different points. This military hero was going to come in and take over the presidency. We've always had people coming in and representing the popular enthusiasm of the time. We've always had some celebrity politics. It's the nature of the thing, and we're
It's
a free
Kennedy,
society.
Nixon. I mean,
well, and that's right. And I would argue that the real issue is whether the campaign that makes that pitch is going to be successful then in positioning themselves to govern and deal with the problems.
Yeah.
And that's really what we ought to be thinking about.
Well, we are just a little bit over a month away from this great decision. A pro tip for a voter. Again, you've dealt with voters your whole career. Where should they look if they really want to make an educated decision about up and down the ballot? What should they be doing?
I don't think there's any set way to do it, but I would go to some places where they write in a little more depth and recognize that you're looking for a diversity of opinion, and go to, for example, the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, and try to get both sides. Locally, I think the Post-Gazette probably bounces left, although I don't want to dump on them. They once endorsed me for state treasurer. I love them.
Good.
My sense is that there are authorities you can go to. On taxes, I invite people to go to the Tax Foundation and look at their website and look at it objectively, and also go to the Brookings and Urban Institute, which tends to be a little more left of center, but also based on sound analysis. I would go to the American Enterprise Institute for the center right on social policy and on defense. And then I would take a look at some other authorities. My colleague, Senator Byron Dorgan, who's a respected liberal from the Senate, retired, as part of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Mm-hmm. They do some very interesting work. Yeah. I would look at a variety of sources and steer clear of probably the blogs that whip people up.
Yeah, stay away from TikTok.
Well, if you want spinning cats, it's a good place to go, but I'm not. I don't think that should be your main source of information.
Former Congressman Phil English, thank you so much. Always a joy to have you.
It's an honor, sir.
You've been listening to The Joel Natalie Show, Erie, Pennsylvania's daily podcast from TalkErie.com. Subscribe to our show on your favorite podcatcher and get involved by emailing Joel@TalkErie.com.